And we are starting. We are here. We're so glad you're here to learn about one of the big, amazing species off our coast, actually, two species off our coast. So we're going to jump right in and we will start with explaining who we are and where we are. So I'm Jackie Hildering. I am up in Port McNeill, and I hope there's lots of kids from up and around this area as well that are listening. I am a humpback whale researcher, but I care about all things in the ocean, and I really care about people caring about things in the ocean. Effie is the person who is going to do the technical side of things, who will be looking through questions that are being asked, that kind of thing. And where Effie is right now is out in the islands somewhere, very close to grizzly bears, because she's also a grizzly bear guide. And both Effie and I have the joy of working for the Marine Education and Research Society, which is based in Kwakwala Territory on northeastern Vancouver Island. And then the most exciting person, believe me, is Dr. Marianne Nyegaard. And we'll tell you a little bit more about Marianne very shortly, but she's usually way, way, way away in New Zealand, and it would be like not a great time for her to be giving a presentation. But it happens to be that she is in Washington, so not so far away this time. But before I tell you more about Dr. Nyegaard, Marianne, we are wanting to know about you. And Effie first is going to tell you about the technical pieces of things before we ask you the poll questions.
Yeah, so as everyone may notice, you are muted and your camera is off. If you have any questions, you can use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Please put them there throughout the entire webinar. We will collect them and we will save them for the end. And we will make sure to try and answer all of them. If you have any technical difficulties, you can go into the chat and ask me a question directly, and I will try to help you. And then we also have a few polls. When I start them, they will pop up on your screen. You click submit, and then in a little while, we'll share the results.
Okay, so we want to know who you are. And the two questions that we have for you is we want to know where you are, and we want you to know if you is a group of students with their teacher that are listening, or if adults have snuck in on their own because they're so terribly interested in this opportunity. So here are the two questions for you. And New Zealand and Australia is on there because that's usually where Marianne is. Oh, Europe. We might even have some family members, yeah, of some of the people on this call. Who knows? We're almost done. A lot of Vancouver Islanders. Yay! Because we have two species of Mola around Vancouver Island and British Columbia. And then Effie, do we have the second poll being answered too? We do. We'll give it just a few more seconds. There is the second question. I think some people may not realize you might need to scroll down. That seems to be leading to some more people answering.
All right, I'll pause it in 3, 2, 1.
And the results are, so that everybody can know who's on this call. So lots of people from Vancouver Island, British Columbia, yeah, Northern Vancouver Islanders. Wonderful that you're here. You're my neighbors, you're Effie's neighbors. And then wonderful to see that there are a lot of students and teachers here. Of course, this looks like it's less than the adults on the call, but that's not real because, of course, every one of the people who answered students and teachers is a whole classroom of you wonderful people. So we're going to move on, and I'm hoping that the square with the poll results is not on top of the screen. So what this is all about is Marine Education Research Society very much wanting people to care about the life in the ocean, and especially about the life in the cold, dark water, because so often people think there's more going on in warm water because I can see it. Yeah, but then you don't have the plankton, yeah, that can support having like huge humpback whales here. So tomorrow is Ocean's Day. And the reason that there is actually Ocean Day is because so many people don't realize how important the ocean is, that they think that things are separate from land and sea, but they're not. So just making sure that I say the things about the ocean, which is why we're doing this, is that the ocean, even if you live in the desert, about half your oxygen is coming from it, from the plant-like plankton that are making oxygen. That's taking in a whole bunch of the gas that we humans are making mistakes about, yeah, that creates climate change. The ocean, the water is going around and around, the same water all the time. Most of it is usually salt water in the ocean as it's cycling around. There's all kinds of food in the ocean. A big, huge mass like that is controlling everything from how strong winds are to temperatures. There's energy and transportation, and then there's just all the beauty and mystery and everything else about the ocean that gives so much inspiration. So having explained that, now I get to, with huge joy, properly introduce Dr. Marianne Nyegaard. And I never thought I'd get to meet somebody like Marianne. But amazingly, because of a mola that was found close to Port Hardy on northern Vancouver Island, it connected us, because that kind of mola, if it weren't for Marianne, we wouldn't even know that it was in our waters, and that we actually have two completely different kinds. So every year on Ocean Day, we want to have an amazing species to help people care about the ocean, especially the cold ocean and all the life in it. And we want to find a wonderful human being to talk about it. And oh my goodness, the joy that we are able to have, like the world expert on this one of the two species, the person who named this species, to actually be on this call with you, and that it's for children, makes me so incredibly happy. So we are going to talk about Mola, learn about them generally. We're going to learn from the world's expert, and then we're going to talk about the two kinds that belong in our waters. So I'm turning it over. I'm going to stop sharing, and it's going to be Marianne that shares the screen, and we will get started with the exciting part.
All right. Thank you so much, Jackie, for that awesome introduction. And hello, everybody out there. I am so delighted to be invited to talk about molas. They are, of course, my favorite fish. And I think they're just so crazy and curious and awesome. And I hope I can do them justice by sharing some of the knowledge with you. So first up, I just want to point out that there are different species of molas. So we're not just talking about one species, but there are several in the world. And here on the slide, you can see 3 of them. Some of them live in warm waters, and some of them can live in more cold waters. So the slides that I'll show you are not all from cold water areas. Some of them are from the tropics. But I'll talk very generally about molar biology to start with, and then we'll get into the more specifics of Vancouver Island towards the end of the presentation. So just bear in mind that a lot of the pictures you'll see are from all around the world. All right, I want to start just with explaining what a mola is. It is a fish, and it is very strange. It's like a big plate when you look at it from the side. So it's like a round thing here, and it has these 2 big fins. So when we look at it from the side, it looks enormous. But just like when you turn a plate on its side, when you look at a mola from, this is a picture from the top, but if you look at it from behind or from the front, it will look really skinny, just like a plate that's upright. So molas are in a way these big plates that swim around in the ocean with these big fins. The name mola comes from Latin, and it means millstone, and it's from this old contraption where a mill had this big grinder stone that you can see here, and you can kind of see why it looks a little bit like a mola. So that's where the name comes from. They are also called sunfish, or ocean sunfish, I should say. Sunfish can also be a little species of freshwater fish that lives in the lakes in North America, but ocean sunfish are these guys, these big molars. And I'll show you why they're called sunfishes, because if you're very lucky and you're sailing around in a boat, you might see one flat on its side right at the sea surface. And it's just lying there. And what they're doing is that they're warming up and they're basically sunbathing. And so this one got a little bit of a fright when the boat came near, and they'll just swim off. But that's why they're called sunfish, is because they bask or sunbathe in the ocean surface. Now, they're obviously famous for growing huge. I mean, we're talking car-sized fish here. So this one here fish is from New Zealand. It's the heaviest bony fish in the world, and they can reach more than 3 meters in length and over 2,700 kilos. We don't know how big they can grow because no one has actually measured we have very few measurements of large sunfish, I should say. So we know that they can at least reach 2.7 ton. This is a lot of fish. So you might think it's kind of a shark-like fish because sharks grow very big, but they're not. They're actually a bony fish. So they are more related to like a salmon than they are to a shark. So they have a skeleton that's made out of bone, and whereas sharks have a skeleton that's made out of cartilage, just like your ears. If you wriggle your ears, you can feel how it's all soft. That's a shark skeleton. So when we talk about the heaviest bony fish in the world, it's the ones that have a skeleton of bone. Now they start life tiny. So this little guy here is only a few millimeters long, and you can fit them just on your finger. And it's incredible the size increase they have to go through to reach adulthood. So this little tiny ball of spikes can grow into this. And they increase their weight over 600 million times in this process. Now, if a human baby did that, we would reach into outer space. So that's how big of an increase that sunfish have. When they hatch from the egg, they can actually fit inside your eye. So they are tiny. And they have a long journey ahead of them to reach a big adult sunfish. So let's have a look at how they start life. They start life as a little larvae like this one, and they actually have a tail. And then they grow into these little spiky things. And in the process, this tail disappears. And in its place, instead, we can see these two fins here start to develop into this kind of contraption here, where it's a little round, flat fish that's a bit like an Oreo. And so you might ask, well, how do they swim if they don't have a tail? Because a normal fish, if you will, they have a tail and they beat that, and then they go forward. And the sunfish instead, they beat these two big fins here. So they swim through the water with them. And so they don't have a tail at all. So this flap here at the back is actually their rudder or their steering wheel. So they can steer with that. So let's have a look at how they swim. So here you can see they beat these fins against a really stiff body. And here is the back rudder. And it's kind of waving it a little bit back and forth in the water to steer with. And they also have a pectoral fin here, and it's keeping that right flat against its body. They can see that it's beating it, it's using that to help it steer, but the steering is mainly from the back here. And so in a little bit, it'll turn, and I want you to keep your eye on this. See how it's using it to turn in the water. So that's how they swim. This is the only type of fish in the ocean that does that. Every other fish in the ocean has a tail. So we could ask, well, where do they come from, these strange fish? Are they somehow really ancient and sort of a dinosaur kind of fish? But that's not the case at all. Dinosaurs are very old, ancient, and they lived a long time ago. 240 million years ago, they evolved, and they became extinct and disappeared 65 million years ago. And it wasn't until after they had disappeared that sunfish evolved. And they're actually related to pufferfish if you know these are little tropical fish, and they live on the reefs. And when they get a fright, they can puff themselves up to this little spiky ball here. So these two are actually the most related fish species. So they're not at all anything to do with old dinosaurs. Now, what do they eat? We look at the mouth of a sunfish, it's like this little round thing here, and they actually have a structure inside made out of teeth that are fused together, and it looks like a beak. But they never really close their mouth very often, so they swim around the ocean like a little hoover, and that's also how they eat. They go up to a jellyfish and they go, and they suck them right in. And so to help them eat, they have these teeth in the throat. So deep inside here, past the mouth, down in the throat, they have these sets of teeth that have all of these spikes on them. And that helps them grab these jellyfish and swallow them. Now, where do they eat? Because the ocean is not just a uniform soup, like it's not just all the same. So the ocean is very structured, even if it's just water. And so if we look at, this is depth, and this is land here. So in the upper layer, we have a lot of the animals that need to breathe air. So for example, whales, like Jackie studies, they need to come up and breathe. And when they dive down, they hold their breath. And there's lots and lots of life up here in the upper layer. But there is also lots of life as you go deeper. And we get into this zone where the light no longer reaches very much. And it's full of food down here. It's called the mesopelagic zone. And this is where sunfish, they will dive down into this and look for jellyfish and other animals that are similar to jellyfish, and they will eat them, and then they will come back up to the surface and they will warm up before they will go back down again and search and eat for food. And it's really cold down there, so they lose their body heat, and then they have to come back up to the surface to warm up before they go back down again. And they dive between 100 meters to about 1 kilometer down in the ocean. That's where they look for their food. So they work really hard for their food. So are they fast? In the old days, people didn't think these fish could swim at all because they look so weird. So they thought they were just drifting around the ocean without swimming. But we know now that that is not true at all. These are really good swimmers. And when they are small, and this is maybe 40 centimeters long, these are really zippy, and they beat their fins really fast, and they can go around in the water really quickly. As they get bigger, they become less zippy, but very strong swimmers. So it takes them longer to kind of make a circle, and they're not as agile, but they're very strong swimmers. And when they're little, they're so fast they can jump out of the water. It's rare to see, but it is very cool when it happens. And one of the reasons that they will jump right out of the water is if they get disturbed by somebody who wants to eat them, like an orca, for example. So we have records of orca coming up to sunfish, and the sunfish will jump out of the water to try and escape. Because orca love to play with sunfish, or I should say some types of orca, because there are different types of orca. So some of them really love to play with them. So here we have one that's pushing a sunfish around. Here's one that has surfaced balancing a sunfish right on top of its head. And here are two juvenile or very young orca, and they have come together and they're kind of lifting a sunfish out of the water. And here's the mom watching. Others will kick them out of the water with their tail, and they can also kind of play football with them, or headball, if you will. They push them out of the water like that. And sometimes they will also eat them, but a lot of times they just play with them. We can see that sunfish have evolved behaviors to try and protect themselves against the orca, because they are vulnerable. They will die if they are bitten. So the head area here and the belly of a sunfish is where all the organs are. So they can't survive if they get a bite there. So we can see when orca come up to them, they try and keep the back end there towards the orca to avoid being bitten here. And if the orca comes close, the sunfish will turn up and out of the water, and they may even turn so the whole stomach area is out of the water. And I'll try and show you. It's a little bit hard to see, but we have seen some footage, some video from New Zealand where an orca came up to a sunfish. And as it came closer and closer, the sunfish started to turn in the water. So you can see the white there is its belly, and it's turning upside down. And then as the orca approaches real close, the sunfish kind of rolls over its head, and then it rights itself as the orca swims off. So it's really cool behaviors they have evolved. And we know they can survive being bitten at the back because we see sunfish out in the world with the back end missing. And they compensate. Instead of steering with the back end, they learn to steer with these fins instead. These two big fins here and that little pectoral fin there, they can steer with them even when they have the back end is missing. Sometimes though, the bites are too big. So you can see here, this has reached some of the intestines, and so this sunfish didn't survive. And we think this was eaten by a tiger shark. We don't know for sure, but that's our best guess. So this is from Indonesia, where I sometimes do work on sunfish. Now, many other organisms in the ocean loves to eat sunfish, and one of them is tuna. Tuna love eating them. And when the sunfish are really little and they can fit in the palm of your hand, they can also fit through the mouth of a tuna. But there are many other species of fish that will eat sunfish. For example, this guy here is called a lancet fish, and they love eating little tiny sunfish like that. So you can imagine they're like a little M&M, and lots of things in the ocean can eat them. And these little guys, the only way they can defend themselves is by developing these little spikes, and also by growing into very large animals that are too big for most fish in the ocean to eat. Now, not everyone is out to get them though. Sunfish have friends out there, and they are cleaner fish. So sunfish have a lot of parasites on the body, which are just little animals that live on their skin. And that's really irritating for the sunfish. So they ask fish to come and eat them off their skin. So here we can see this is up in Indonesia. Here's a sunfish, and all of these fish here is just eating little parasites from the skin. And it's really cool. Up in California, and maybe also up here, sunfish will get birds to come and pick off parasites as well. So they come up, they lie themselves next to birds at the sea surface, and the birds will come over and help them. Very cool fact is that sunfish can close their eyes. So you can see here, this is a little membrane or a little structure, a little bit of skin that they can pull over their eyes, so that when these cleaner fish here come and clean in around the eyes, that they won't get hurt. I have a little bit of footage. This is from California, and this is a sunfish being cleaned by some wrasse down there, some small cleaner fish, and you can see the sunfish puts its head straight up, and that's like a signal to the cleaner fish that it wants to be cleaned, and they can come in and they can pick off parasites from the skin. You can see here, these big black things are all parasites. So they're very large, and you can see these little fish have no chance of picking them off. And this is when this fish will go and it'll ask the seabirds to clean it instead, because they've got these big beaks and they can pick off these large parasites. So where do sunfish live? Well, they live everywhere in the world's oceans except for near the poles. So up near the North Pole, it's a little bit too cold, and down the South Pole, it's a little bit too cold. But other than that, we basically find sunfish across the world. Now, they're not the same species everywhere. So some like warm waters and some like more cold water. So all up, there are 5 different species. So we have the one that is very famous from your coastline. Here's the ocean sunfish called Mola. So this is, remember, Mola means millstone. So this in Latin is called millstone. So we then have a warm water species that's called giant sunfish, and this is the one that grows largest of them all. And then we have the new species that's called the hoodwinker sunfish, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. First, I want to introduce this species that's called sharp-tailed sunfish, and you can easily recognize them because at the back here, instead of having a round back end, they have a little projection there that sticks out. So they're very easy to recognize. The last one up here is called slender sunfish, and that is just a small species. So it doesn't grow very much bigger than this. All of these 4 species were discovered more than 200 years ago, and that's a long, long time ago. That's before the cars were even invented. So that was when people still had horses and carts and things. So a long time ago that these were discovered. So it was really cool when we discovered a brand new species in only 2017. So it's only 7 years ago or so. Very recent. And this fish had just been hiding. No one had really noticed it before. We discovered it down in New Zealand and here part of Australia. So you guys are up here. So a long way away. Now, it had been hiding all these years and no one had ever really noticed it. So we called it the hoodwinker sunfish because hoodwinker means like a trickster or someone who's sort of hiding or trying to deceive you. So that's where the name comes from. We also found it down here. This is South Africa and South America. So this is where we found this fish in 2017 when we first encountered it. And when we look at the world, so again, this is you guys up here, and this is Australia and New Zealand, and the colors are the temperature of the water. So red is warm and blue is cold. So we could see, well, it looks as if this fish is basically found down here in the cold water down in the southern hemisphere of the planet. So we thought, well, that's its distribution, that's where it lives. So we were very surprised when in 2019, we suddenly found it up here where you guys are. It was first found in California, just a little bit south of here. We were so surprised because how did it swim across all of this warm water here? That was very puzzling. And the reason we know, or the reason we discovered them here is because of pictures. So first, we just saw this on social media, but since then we have worked with Jackie at MERS and also some other researchers in North America. And we have gotten the message out for everyone to just send us their pictures of sunfish, and we can then tell what species it is. And when we know where the pictures were taken, we can then start to see where these fish are. And MERS has a website where you can go and have a little read about the project if you want. And you can also submit pictures there if you have any, or if you see any sunfish yourself. So what did we learn from this? Well, we got a whole heap of pictures from this coastline here. So this is Vancouver Island where you are, and all the way up to Alaska and all the way down to California. And we found out that most of the sunfish that are seen in this area, they are Mola, and they have always been known to be here. They're very famous and very well loved. But we also found that Mola is also around here. And at first we thought maybe it's just a fish that's been lost, or, you know, they're not very common here. But the more we look, the more we find. So it really looks as if this is also part of their home. And the reason why no one really noticed them for all of these years is because they look very similar. So Mola and Mola look very similar. So you can see the body form is sort of an oval shape. But if you start to look closer, you can see the head shape here goes up on a Mola, and on a Mola tecta, it's more of a straight line up to the fin. Mola can also develop a little nose, and Mola tecta never does that, so it's always rounded here. And Mola, you can see it has some skin wrinkles here, so it looks like it's wrinkly. And Mola tecta never does that, so it's always smooth here on the body. And on the back here, Mola has a broad back end, and it's kind of a little bit wavy here at the end. And in contrast, Mola tecta has a very narrow back end, and they have a little division that divides the back end into two. And it's divided by a little bit of soft skin, and that means this really stiff rudder can move relative to each other. Mola cannot do that. The whole rudder just moves as one. So that's a really good way of telling them apart. And would you believe it? I only arrived in Washington State yesterday, but a massive Mola tecta just stranded just south of here down in Oregon. So that was, I think, 3 or 4 days ago. And also in May, just late last month, a Mola tecta stranded up here at Vancouver Island near Tofino. So they are around, and it is so, so exciting that the more people who are aware of these two species, the more people send us photos and share their observations with us, and we learn more and more. There's also another way you can check how common things are in your area, and it's through iNaturalist, which is a really cool website where you can log in and you can type in Mola and go to your area, and you can see all the pictures that people have uploaded there of Mola. And as you can see here along your coastline, Vancouver Island is covered in red, which means there's a lot of sunfish here all the way down the coast of California, Oregon, Washington, and further up. There's actually sunfish all the way up here, but they're just not uploaded yet. In contrast, you can see Mola tecta has also got a fair few sightings now. So, but it's not as common, but it's definitely here in the current system. We think that it likes the cold water a little bit more than Mola, but we're not quite sure. But we find it all the way up here. Right. So what does all of this mean? It means that there's a lot of unknowns about sunfish all across the world, but also in your waters, which is really exciting. So only a few years ago, we thought that was just the one species here, and now it turns out that there are two, and they live together, they share the waters. So the message from the molars to all of you guys is that it's always important to always be curious, because you need to look twice at everything in the ocean, because you never know what it is that you see. And there's so many things we still don't know about and understand about our oceans. So from the tiny little things all the way up to the big animals, there is so much yet to be discovered and understood. So always be curious. And that is the end of my talk. And now I would so love to hear questions from you guys, and I hope I can answer them. So yeah, let me know what more you want to know. And just, just a quick, if you have any Mola photos to submit, please go to the MERS website and you can upload them there and be part of our study. And I also have a Facebook page that's called Ocean Sunfish Research, and that we post regularly news about sunfish there. So thank you so much for listening, and I can't wait to hear your questions.
Fantastic. We've been keeping track of the questions. Effie has them written down. Maybe we'll get it so that the slide isn't being shared so we can see your face completely.
Yes.
Marianne.
Yeah.
So absolutely brilliant. I have to say that it's amazing when somebody is an incredible scientist and also an incredible teacher. And you are. That was fantastic. A few questions, and I know more will come in, so write them into the Q&A. We have about 10 minutes for questions even. I do want to share that you showed the amazing information about how like birds will pick off the prey on Mola. I'm so lucky that I get to go out in the way out in the open ocean, and we see it there too. We even have black-footed albatross that pick the parasites off. And a reminder to the kids, like these mola, yeah, we have seen them in Port Hardy, we've seen them in Port McNeill, we've seen them in Alert Bay as well. The first question from an adult in Campbell River, and the adults are not the most important, but we're going to make sure this one gets answered, is that do killer whales eat mola here? And I'm actually, maybe will say what I know because it's here. Of the predators that Marianne mentioned, is that yes, we have sharks. We also have tuna and lancet fish that are predators of mola, but there's so little known about the mola here. But also, there's actually not so much known about the one kind of orca that could eat mola. So in British Columbia, we have 4 different kinds of orca, and there's one kind that, and they're completely separate population, that's more often in the open ocean. And it's known that those, called the offshore orca, eat sharks and even like some rays and other kinds of fish. So maybe they also eat mola, but we'd have to find them doing it, or find like a chunk of mola when the orca are feeding. And I don't know, Marianne, if you want to add anything to that. So for this area, we don't know yet if there's a kind of orca that eats mola.
All I want to add is that you're so right that we need to see it happen, or we need to find some kind of evidence that these orca have eaten these sunfish, or that they play with them. Someone has to see it. And when we did the study on orca and sunfish interactions, we didn't have very many observations. And I was working with an orca researcher, and we were both thinking, this doesn't happen very often. And we were kind of not really interested in continuing the study because there wasn't very much data. But once we started looking, and this was especially using social media, we just found one example after the other of this happening all across the world. However, up here, there hasn't been any evidence yet, so we don't know. And why is it more seen in one area versus another? Well, it could be that it's because more people go out on the water in one area more so than in the other. So we don't know how often it happens. We can just see that there were a lot more observations that we had ever dreamed of, and they just keep coming. So with more social media and more people out on the water, more cameras, we will hopefully learn more about whether it happens here or not.
Brilliant. We have a few 2 questions that are a bit of a reminder for everybody. One of them is from Lincoln, who's 5 years old, and he'd like a reminder about what mola eat.
Oh, yes. So they eat jellyfish. So these blobs, and they look like plastic bags in the water, but they are, of course, not. But they are little morsels, little packages of food that the molars will eat. When the molars are very small, we don't really know what they eat. But we can see as they grow, they will eat from the seabed as well. So they will swim all the way to the bottom of the ocean, but close to the shore. And they will eat crabs and mussels and all sorts of animals that live in and on the seabed. But as they grow bigger and bigger and become very big, they leave the coastline, and then they start doing these deep dives deep into the ocean, and they look for jellyfish.
Wonderful. And that taps into this other reminder question. Is from a student in Victoria, and that's why do sunfish need to bask in the sun?
Oh, this is also a really good question, because we don't really know. Yes, we think, especially when they need to dive into very cold water to feed. But there are examples also, including from my own work, where I have put satellite trackers on sunfish that also records depth, where sunfish have dived deep into the ocean and stayed there the whole day without coming up. So exactly when they need to do it is presumably when they get cold enough. and it depends on the temperature where they are. It also depends on the size of the sunfish, because if the sunfish is little, it gets cold really quickly. But if the sunfish is very big, it can stay down longer and endure the cold longer. So it's a really good question. We don't really understand this very well, but we do know that they do need to warm up.
Wonderful. I want to make sure I don't forget to make this comment that Ellie is sharing with us. Ellie's dad is a submarine pilot, so is excited to tell him about all this information about sunfish. Can you imagine if for our research we end up getting a report of a mola from a submarine pilot?
That would be so amazing. We have one from I think is it called it's a remotely operated vehicle. Yeah, that was down in a canyon off California somewhere. So yeah, so that was extremely cool.
That's amazing. We have a question that you would know. What does mola skin feel like? It doesn't look like they have scales like fish. Does it feel like a dolphin's or a shark's or a manta ray's?
Well, it's correct that they don't really have normal fish scales. So the scales of the normal fish have kind of been modified into these little spikes that are really tough and rough. So if you run your hand over a sunfish, it'll be so rough. And if you're not careful, it'll rip up your skin. And I know this myself from working with sunfish, where I have been underwater and suddenly I'm bleeding green because underwater the blood looks green. And that is very cool. So very rough skin, I would say. If you run your hand up a shark, it's like that. If you run your hand down a shark, they're pretty smooth that way because the water has to come over them. But a sunfish is just prickly all the time in all directions.
That's so wonderful. And then they're getting an opportunity to ask the world's expert and are going to get some answers about we don't know, because the question is, do the two types of mola that are found in British Columbian waters interbreed? What time of year do they breed? And do they migrate?
Oh, this is awesome. So for mola, okay, so I should say a lot of this is not known, especially not for Mola tecta. We don't know where they breed, when they breed. We don't know how old or how big they are when they start to breed. We have never found a female that was actually mature, as in taking part in spawning. So we don't know when this happens or where. For mola, we have much better understanding. So they do migrate, especially along the coast here. So they will come up during the summer and further down during winter. So they sort of go between Mexican waters and all the way up to Alaska. And you have a super cool sunfish hotspot off Queen Charlotte Sound, or in Queen Charlotte Sound. And there is like when the spring bloom happens and all the food production vamps up in spring, the sunfish come up and they aggregate there to feed. So we know that they do move. We have no idea about Mola tecta. No one has ever tracked them. They're such a new species, we just do not know. Whether they interbreed is a super question. We don't know. I have sometimes seen pictures of sunfish that I think look like a mix between the two, and I'm greatly intrigued. I'd love to do some genetic research on them, but it's super rare, and at the moment we don't know if they interbreed. I would say it's rare if they do.
That's wonderful. We have to make sure, because there's a lot of kids on the call who are at school. We're almost done with time, but we're going to try to squeeze in 3 more questions. There's even more questions, which is wonderful. And you can do some research into them yourself to answer them. There's one quick one, I think, is, are mola edible to humans?
Oh, they are. Yes, you can absolutely eat them, but mostly people don't. They're not very delicious. So, but people in Japan and in China and in Taiwan and South Korea, they eat them. So that's yeah, I have never tasted them myself. They look very unappetizing.
Yeah, report them, don't eat them.
Yeah.
Next question is there a size difference or physical difference that we know of between male and female mola?
Oh, excellent question. So when we look at a molar from the outside, we can't see whether it's a male or a female. But generally, females grow much larger than males. We don't exactly know how big the males grow, but we can see all the big sunfish that we find, and that is across all the 4 species that grow big. So not the little species, but all the 4 species that grow big. The big fish are always females. And for Mola tecta, I have found very few males, and they have all been under 1 meter. Everything else above a meter, always female.
Big females.
Yeah.
And then our last question, which is great because it goes back to like the work that we're doing together, is that what is the current mola research focused on? The last question.
Oh, this is also excellent questions. So there aren't very many molar researchers in the world. So there's not a lot of research, but the research that's going on, there's a lot on diet at the moment and understanding what the different species eat. And if they eat the same thing and live in the same area, how come that one isn't out competing the other, like taking all the resources, so one species will be pushed out? How come they can live together? So that's one of the questions that's being looked at. There's also a fair bit of work being done on movement to understand migrations, because we don't really understand, do all the sunfish within a species, do they all interbreed, or are there different populations? Those sorts of things. And for my own research, one of the things I'm very interested in is what's called biogeography, which is where are the different species found? And where are the small ones? Where are the kindergartens and the nurseries? And what habitat and areas are important for the small sunfish that are going to be next generation adults? We don't understand that very well at all. So that's one of the focuses on my own work. And I also do a little bit of genetics to understand how the fish, whether they are connected with each other or whether they form separate populations.
That's amazing. And then the beauty is that everybody who has reported mola to us or to iNaturalist, that all of that is coming together in a research paper too, that Marianne and other scientists are putting together. So those are called citizen scientists when you're giving a piece of information to help research. So that's how we're involved. And that's so interesting that all the people who have seen mola alive or the ones that end up on shore, that those are all reported in and everybody's delivering puzzle pieces. And
Yes.
so, sorry, please, Marianne, continue.
Yes. So if anyone out there has already submitted photos, just want to say thank you so much, because we couldn't do this without citizen scientists, because molas, even though they're not uncommon, it is difficult to find them. So if you're just one person, no one person could do this on their own. So it's all thank you to all the citizen scientists out there. And also, if you have a video or pictures, please submit them. And be part of this. And if you see any in future, we'd love to hear from you. So yeah, thank you everyone who's helping to make this happen.
Okay, and it is time for big thank yous. So a big thank you to Effie to make sure that all the questions were coming through. A fantastic big thank you to Dr. Marianne Nyegaard, for like world leading scientist, but is taking the time to be with us. And I dare say that I think that this recording, because we are recording it, is going to be watched a lot also by adults who want to know more about these mysterious fish. I am really excited. And for the North Island kids, you might even see Dr. Nyegaard up here because she's going to come visit. So I'm super excited about that. And then otherwise, that's it. Tomorrow is Ocean Day. Every day is Ocean Day because the ocean is so important. You've learned about Marvellous Mola from a magnificent scientist. And now go out there and care about the ocean. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.